Don't nerf, only buff. When all the characters are broken, then no one is, and the issues with that approach. Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. I'm Simura here, and today I'm gonna talk about this sentiment these days that fighting games are pretty much offering us really weak characters. You feel restricted, you feel like the developers intend for you to play in a very specific way, and it's hard to deviate from that, and why a lot of people are now asking for games to pretty much open up and give you a lot of tools and really powerful characters, and why I think there is a problem here. You see, for the past couple of years now, developers have been trying to make fighting games easier. They are trying to appeal to a wider audience because fighting games have a stigma of being really difficult, right? And this can be done through a number of ways. One of the ways that the developers did it were to lower the execution requirement. Now, games in general, it's much easier to do stuff, it's much easier to get special moves out, it's much easier to do combos, you get the idea. But one of the really common ways that developers have done it as well is simply streamlining the mechanics, making the mechanics much easier to understand and generally make the experience a lot simpler. When you really think about it, what does the casual hate? What does the beginners hate more than anything? Well, they hate having to deal with oppressive strategies. Might be intense rushdown or might be very oppressive zoning. So what the developers did as well is to simply lower the power level of the characters, make the characters less complex and gives them less powers, and you can see this in many games. One of the prime examples is Akuma not being able to jump back and throw fireballs, Ryu not able to have a cross-up tatsu, for example, in Street Fighter V, a ton of examples. In general, if you compare a lot of the characters in the modern games to just their previous iterations, for example, Strive to Exert, Street Fighter V to Street Fighter 4, you will find the previous generation characters to have a lot more options and be much more powerful. Now, there have been games in this generation that have kinda tried to give you powerful characters and really open-ended systems, and unfortunately they never really worked. One of the two examples that I can think of is DNF Duel. Obviously it's still somewhat of a new game, but the game gave you a ton of utility. Characters could do anything. The game, in my opinion, did have some mechanical issues and generally pace with the movement and everything, but characters in DNF Duels are very powerful, right? And one of the other examples is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is a very loose game. You do pretty much what you want in that game, and the common thing between DNF Duel and Marvel Infinite is that they didn't work out, they didn't really succeed, right? And obviously there are outside factors, like each of them have their own separate problems, but one thing I have seen people talk about when it comes to both of these games is that, you know what, they're just too crazy, they're too wild for me, I don't really want to have to deal with that. And it's something that you pretty much can't deny. Also, especially in the case of DNF Duel, a lot of people were calling it Kosoge. I'm not really into the anime culture, so I'm not sure if I spelled that correctly, but pretty much the game is too crazy. You can't really take it seriously as a competitive game. And obviously in this day and age, a lot of the modern games are centered around esports, around tournaments and all of that, so balancing have become much more important and you can't really ignore it. You see, one of the main issues with making everyone very powerful is that there will be characters that are just at the top. Regardless of how open-ended your system is, someone will always be completely busted. Obviously, when it comes to Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, we all remember launch Dante, and when it comes to a game like DNF Duel, Swift Master obviously did a ton of work in that game. So this isn't really something that, you know, you just can't prevent. It's gonna happen naturally. And this isn't anything new either. When you really think of the older games had some really crazy characters as well. Games, for example, like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, it had very powerful characters. The balancing was kinda whack. And this goes for other games that are really popular as well, that people consider loose. A game like Third Strike is really beloved, but the balancing is pretty weak, I must say. Like Chun-li, Yon, and Ken are very powerful compared to the other characters. Obviously there are some other characters that are decent as well, but the balancing in Third Strike isn't its strongest element. But despite of this, what you will notice is that people love Marvel 2, people love Marvel 3, people love Third Strike, right? Despite the games being objectively busted. Yet when we have newer games that are objectively busted, they aren't getting the same love. Maybe in the future people will learn to appreciate them more, but currently that is not happening. And in my opinion, the main reason for this is that the other elements of making fighting games easier have carried over. You see, when you compare a game like Third Strike, and let's talk about something like Urien's Unblockables, that was really difficult, right? It's kinda hard to do that stuff. Not anyone will be able to do it, and that makes you appreciate it that much more. These games had, in my opinion, a much better design when it comes to the mechanics of the game. Third Strike is timeless when it comes to the mechanics, and I think Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as well. The main issue with a game like DNF Duel is that the broken stuff is just out there. It requires zero effort and everyone can pretty much do it, which means that it's much more common, but it also loses its appeal, it loses its wow factor, it loses what makes it special. And I think the main issue comes down to, like I said, the mechanics of the game not holding up to the character's power level. You can have characters that are very powerful, but the mechanics have to be there to make the game enjoyable and give you like an option through the mechanics to be able to fight these characters, right? And that's at least my opinion. Now, when you really think about fighting game design in general, let's say special moves, right? Let's say we're talking about moves like Zangief 720, his critical art, or the Raging Demon. These moves have their specific inputs for a reason, because they don't want you to be able to do it at any specific time. And with games in general being really easy, the output kinda have to match for the game to feel right, which unfortunately isn't the case for many of the modern games. And obviously, like I said, there is a general direction of making the games easier. At least that is how I see it. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with me that in general the mechanics aren't powerful enough to support characters being really strong? Or do you think that there are other factors? Do you imagine, for example, what would happen if we had a character like Elena in Street Fighter V, if she had a V trigger which just heals herself, and obviously had a V skill where she would able to build that V gauge? She will be completely busted, and there isn't like any ways in Street Fighter V to countermeasure that. Let me know your thoughts, I would love to hear it. I will be leaving a link to the Patreon, the Discord, Twitter and Twitch pages in the description below. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to stream as much as I would like, but you know, hopefully we will be able to get through that later. And I'm sorry if there is a little bit of noise or something in the background. This video have been start-stop for days now, and I feel like it's kinda cursed. So if you like it, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching and stay safe.